Okay, today on Pro Mindset, we have a special guest come by way of the Bay Area in Northern California, Mel Abraham. Mel is a thought leader, financial expert, author, speaker, coach, podcaster. Welcome to Pro Mindset.
Craig, thank you for having me. This is cool to be able to get a chance to chat with you.
Okay, so you have your own podcast called The Affluent Entrepreneur.
Yep.
How long have you been doing that? What's that about?
So go back a little ways. I actually had an original podcast called The Entrepreneur Solution that I started back in 2015, and I did it all wrong. And by the time I got to 100 episodes, I was dying. It was a lot of work.
What do you mean you were doing it all wrong?
So what I did in that podcast is I made sure that every single episode had a worksheet, had an email sequence. And so every week I would not only record the podcast, but I had to create all the collateral stuff and the landing pages and the email campaigns and all that stuff. And by the time you get done with 100 episodes, I was baked. I was done. And so I shut it down. Plus the other mistake I made is my first book was called The Entrepreneur Solution. That podcast was called The Entrepreneur Solution. But then if I wanted to shift or pivot, it was branded to the book and not the message. And so and we can go into this, but when I decided to come back into the game after the cancer journey and that type of thing, I said, I want to do it via podcast, but I want to do it via podcast and YouTube as a combination. So it was a video show, audio show that we did. And what I want to do is have a conversation around entrepreneurship and affluence and life. And so that's where the whole affluent entrepreneur message came from, which now allows me to bring on guests. So not all the episodes are solo episodes. I bring on guests to have conversations with them. I bring clients on or people, audience members on, and do Q&A shows with them. So it gives me a lot of latitude to do things that I didn't otherwise do. And so this new show has been around just over 2 years now. Just over 2 years. We've done on this show, we've done 145 or so, 146 episodes. And we've got episodes already recorded that'll take us in for another 6 to 8 weeks. We're probably 2.5 months ahead.
What's the biggest impact that your podcast is making? What is the message points? How is it touching your audience?
I think the biggest thing for me is that a lot of the conversation is revolving around finances, money, financial freedom, and those things. And I'm a CPA by education. But I'm not a investment advisor. I don't have any of those licenses. I don't sell investments. I don't sell insurance. But I think so many people are struggling or have struggled, especially coming out of the pandemic, with finances and even just the belief that they have the opportunity to have financial freedom. And yet, not only is it possible, I actually think financial freedom is a birthright. We just won't talk about it. As a society, as families, we were told don't talk about money. It's impolite. But if money's the second biggest cause of divorce behind infidelity, why are we not talking about it? We can't solve problems without having frank, open conversations. So I don't have the bias of selling investments or investment strategies. I just want to give people the principles that drive financial freedom that can equip them and get them to a point where they go, gosh, I now understand it. I understand the need. And now I realize that not only can I do it, I have a friend on the journey. And that's really what the whole show's about.
Okay, so you have to spill the beans a little bit and share with us a handful of the basic principles that you got to have to put yourself in a position where you have financial freedom. Most people think you have to win the lottery or you have to make a lot of money. Okay, and both of those help. But what are those principles that apply to everybody that regardless of whether you're making millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars, you can still have financial freedom? So
here's the thing. Let's just kill the myth first. A study of 10,000 millionaires, 88% of them were first-generation millionaires. 78%, not 88, 78% were first generation millionaires, meaning that it wasn't inherited, it wasn't gifted, it wasn't won, it was made, it was built. So if 8 out of 10 people made it in the first generation, then that means that we all have access to it. Okay, so it's not something that, well, I was born on the wrong side of the tracks, or I was born to the wrong family, or I don't have the same education, I didn't go to an Ivy League school. It's none of that. And when you look at the data, the majority of the people that were millionaires never made over $150,000 a year. So it wasn't internet millionaires that sold their company for hundreds of millions of dollars. Now let's look at the other side of it. Let's take people like Mike Tyson, Nicolas Cage, Burt Reynolds, all these popular people that made hundreds of millions of dollars and went broke. And some of them are still broke. Some of them are not with us anymore. But the bottom line is that wealth creation and financial freedom is less about the money and more about the behavior. So if we understand that no one has money issues, they have symptoms of behaviors, choices, and decisions they made, we start to look at it and go, well, wait, that's confronting, because now you're saying it's my fault. I said, no, I'm saying you're responsible. And when you're responsible, you have the ability to respond differently. And so now if we know that it's a behavior, all we need to do is instill the right behaviors. It's the things that you do with some of the athletes and the things that come into place. If we can give them the right behaviors and they do them consistently over time, it is proven to work. And, we want to lose weight. It's simple. Move more, eat less. You want to build wealth? Guess what? Make more, spend less. It's the same thing. It's discipline and it's behavior.
Now let's take this into the sports arena.
Yeah.
Where so many guys, especially young men, make so much money so soon. Perhaps they only make it for 5 to 10 years. Golfers and baseball players sometimes can make it for 20. And they can't sustain their spending when they're finished with their careers, and their income goes to zero in a lot of cases. How do you coach a guy like that so that he can understand? How can you coach him so that he starts practicing the basic fundamentals of finance and behavior during his career, so when he gets out, he doesn't go through 3 to 5 years trying to figure it out, and he's lost half or more of his money before he does figure it out?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and I think that, and you're right. The sooner we can get a hold of them, the better off we are. Okay, because what we need to understand is that there's this section of wealth building that I call the wealth flatline that everyone has to go through. If you have a big shovel like some of these athletes do, that wealth flatline, you can shrink it because you have more money going at it. But you also have a steeper curve that you're going to go up because it can cut off quickly. But the point is that the only thing that drives that wealth flatline is going to be time. Time is the greatest lever. So the sooner if I can take a 20-year-old to start putting money away, and they realize by the time they're 60 that every dollar they put away in their 20s will turn into $80 by the time they're 60, it's a different game. It's a different game. But too often we don't even understand the pure mathematics of investing and what that compounding and that consistent investing is going to do. So I think the first thing is to give them the picture of what it could be. But the second thing, and I think this is the most important thing for everyone that's trying to build wealth or create financial freedom, when someone says, hey, Mel, I want to have $1 million net worth, or a $10 million net worth, or $100 million. It doesn't matter what the number is. My first question to them is, why? Is it just a number? Because if it's just a number, you won't do the things that you need to do because it's not important enough. It's just a statistic. It's another data point. And so the first thing is to get a very vivid image and visual of what you want your life to be like in the long term. May not be today, but in the long term, how do we want to live? I look at my wife and I, We love to travel. My wealth team, I've sat back and I said, I want you to allocate minimum $50,000 to $75,000 travel budget every year. What? Now, here's another thing. Financial advisors are not there to criticize your vision for your life. They're there to help facilitate it. Now, they're supposed to ask critical questions and that kind of thing, but it's not their job to say, hey, I don't think you have you should be traveling as much. That's the life we want. Let's see if we can make it happen. And you tell me what I need to do to be that champion or to do that. So the first thing is, I think, really get really clear on your why. And if you have a spouse, if you have a significant other, if you have someone that is an intimate partner that's going to be sharing life with you, you do this together. You don't do it silo. As much as one might handle the money more than the other, it's a life journey together. And so I think that's the first piece. Then the second, then once they have the vision, we say, all right, let's put a plan in place. And let's also look at the reality of an athlete's life cycle. And let's be really clear, because you have an opportunity here. And if we just look at the statistics, if the opportunity is, I have 5 years and I gotta really nail this thing for 5 years, then let's do it right for 5 years, because there's two journeys that everyone's on, and we think it's one. But the first journey is the earnings journey, making the money. But the money that we make isn't where we find freedom. It isn't where we find control. It's where we find cash. That's it. Then there's a second journey. That's the money journey. That's when we take our money that we made and we give it a job. And every dollar that comes into our life has to have a job description. And some of that job description is to take care of our future. And now we turn around and we build this machine on the side that doesn't require our effort. It doesn't require us getting on a field. It doesn't require us getting into a boardroom. It doesn't require us to run a business. It doesn't even require us to get up in the morning. Our money is now working harder for us than we ever did for it. That's the ultimate goal to where we want to get them to. Now, I'll give you a real life, for instance, with me. 2019, I got diagnosed with cancer. They found what they thought was a 5-centimeter tumor in my bladder. Turned out to be 7.5 centimeters. I went into 3 surgeries, 4 tumors, and by the time I was through, 57 treatments. But when I went into that first surgery, I looked at my wife and my son, and I said, I got to shut everything down. I have to fight, and I have to be able to focus, and I have to be able to heal. And the only priority is surviving so I can thrive. So I had to fight it physically. I had to fight it mentally. I had to fight it psychologically, medically. But I didn't have to fight it financially. And the reason I didn't have to fight it financially is because I used the earnings machine to build the money machine. And I could flip the switch and the money would come out. It allowed me to keep my lifestyle, allowed us to pay the bills. I didn't have to drain savings accounts. We didn't have to sell anything. We didn't have to do any of that. And the sooner we start that journey, the easier it will be. My son's 33 years old. His wife's 30. They've got 2 little girls right now. One's 2 years old and one's 3 months old. They have 3 homes and a multi-million-dollar net worth. I started his brainwashing at 10 years old. But if I can get a hold of an athlete that has the earnings capacity, whether it's for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and say, look, I want to shave a piece off that's going to allow you to live today the way you want to live. And I want to shave a piece off that's going to give you the promise of tomorrow that you desire. And then this is going to sound horrible, but then we protect them from themselves and those around them that I've watched. Well, I'll just buy my friend this and I'll do this for my friend. And all of a sudden they don't keep the math of what's going out and they don't know where the money went. And sometimes that's a hard conversation to have, but I think it's the responsible thing to do if we can. And those are the first things that I would have them do. They'll say, what do I invest in? But see, the investment doesn't matter if we don't get the skills underneath it. The investments are like the finished work on the home. They look pretty. It looks sexy. It's what makes it look beautiful. But that finished work won't stay on the home if the framing and the foundation is shaky. And the framing and the foundation is this stuff. What am I doing with my money? How am I making it? How am I spending it? Where am I allocating it properly? I'm going to get a signing bonus. Great. Let's take a piece of it to celebrate. Let's a piece of it for our future, and let's get a piece of it for our today. And let's allocate it and do it that way.
Well, I've had several clients that their careers are over, that took care of their money, and then haven't worked a day since they finished their careers. Some of them have been 15 years ago. And then I have a lot of guys that once their career was over, within 2 to 3 years, they were broke. And they had to start selling things because they were living a lifestyle that was beyond their means, and it wasn't sustainable. And it's really sad when you see, somebody make $60 million, and obviously they don't get all that because of taxes, and they're on a collision course for financial ruin, and you can see it from a mile away because it's just, they can't, they're spending $25,000 per person in their family to take a private jet to Vegas when they could have taken a commercial jet and it would cost them $2,000.
Yeah.
And so instead of spending $100 each way, they could have spent $2,000 total. So, that's foolishness, obviously, but it does happen,
Think about this. I was sitting with my barber, he's a 23-year-old kid. And he tells me he says, he knows what I do. So we start talking money, and he says, one of my good friends, he just bought a $5,000 watch. And I said, wow, all right. And I love watches. I said, does he make a lot of money? He says, no, he's 22, 23 years old. He's my age. I said, so why did he do it? He said, because his friends thought it was cool. I said, all right, so let me do some math. Remember I said 80 times. I said, so he spent $5,000 on a watch to impress a bunch of dudes that are probably not going to be his life in 3 years. I said, had he invested that money on his own, by the time he got to retirement age, that $5,000 watch would have turned into $400,000 in a nest egg. Now, I'm not telling you what I don't really tell is, I don't want to tell people not to do something. Sometimes I do, but for the most part, I don't. I just want them to be conscious, intentional, and aware. And they go, okay, I'm willing to make that trade-off. But this kid didn't know that. And many of these folks, they don't do the math, so they're making a decision based on present moment or an emotional experience and desire, and then they're not looking at what it could do down the road. Now, we know each other somewhat. I live a good life. I live right here on the beach. So it's not like we're not living on ramen, beans, and rice. But we're making the choices and the decisions, knowing what the future effect is and making sure that we're not impairing that too much. And if we can just get that mentality, it starts to shift everything long term.
Okay, so let's say, for example, you have a client that's a couple, could be a single person. They're in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, their 60s. It really doesn't matter. And they've made bad decisions. They're not where they need to be. The difference between the 30-year-old and the 60-year-old is the time to recover. But what are the things? What is like the tourniquet? What's the like 911 mode for those people? Like maybe 2 or 3 steps they need to do that can make a big difference in where they're going.
So it won't be the same for everyone, but because it depends where they're at. But let's just talk about the first kind of the priorities. The first thing is this. I want everyone to, when they first start out, I call it the wealth priority ladder, is that the first thing I want to make sure is you got at least 1 month's money expenses put away. $1,500 or 1 month, whichever is bigger. And that's not your emergency fund. That's simply something there so you don't have to go into debt if an unexplained thing happens. Most people can't afford an unplanned expense of $600 or more. We shouldn't be in that place. So first things first, and if you need to do it and you go, I don't have that kind of cash, what do I do? I got news for you. I bet if I walked into your home, just like if someone walked into mine, don't tell my wife this, I could sell half the technology in that closet and bring in a whole bunch of cash because I'm not using it. So we can bring in some cash. The only thing that's meant to do is give me a little breathing room. Now we tackle what's going on, the flows in and out, looking at what's your income, where's it coming from, how consistent is it? Are there things we can do to escalate it? Can we add streams of income in? So that's the inflow side. The second then is to look at the outflow. We have to do an archaeological dig and say, let's look at an expense review. What are the wants? What are the needs? What are the things that I don't need anymore? Okay. And needs are survival. It's the roof over the head. It's the food in the gut. It's the clothes on the back. It's the medical. It's survival. And it isn't luxury survival. It is survival. So what is the bare minimum you need to survive? That's the needs. Everything else is a want. And I'm not saying to strip away the wants. I'm just saying to be clear on what's a want, what's a need, because in the wants, now we can look at them and say, I don't get any value. I don't use it. And we start cutting those wants out to give us some more breathing room. Because look, we can't solve, if we've dug a financial hole, the first thing we got to do is stop digging. The second thing is we got to figure out our way to climb out of it. And the only way to climb out of it is figuring out our expenses and figuring out our income. There isn't a magic bullet. You don't go further in debt to get out of debt. It just digs the hole deeper. And so those are the first things that we need to do, is to get control of whatever's going on. And there may be some hard choices, some hard decisions to make. But when we make them, it's like taking that festering splinter out. The digging of that splinter hurts like hell, but there's immediate relief once it's out. And it's the same thing, but it's a painful experience because you're so used to your lifestyle. And what people struggle with more than their lifestyle is the image, especially actors, actresses, people that are in the public eye. They go, well, what's everyone else going to think? Who cares? Let's get you healthy. It's one of the biggest stressors in our lives is finances. Let's get rid of that. I think it's the missing link between mental wellness and physical wellness is financial wellness. When we can fix that, which means that it's just like I wasn't a drinker in college. My fraternity brothers just knew Mel doesn't drink, so they didn't even ask. So we just got to find our values, and we got to live true to that life and say, we're going to build our life that way. Whatever that affluent life is. It could be a tent in Montana. It could be a yacht in Monaco. As long as you can afford either, it doesn't matter to me. I'm not here to define what your success is. I'm simply here to say, let's stay on that and let's not worry about it. Because we live in a society now with our freaking phones and Instagram where you're seeing things. And I'm not exempt from it. Okay. I got a $900 coffee maker that I bought off of freaking Instagram because it looks cool. Okay. And I can order a cup of coffee like I'm at Starbucks, but it's in my kitchen right from an app. And I'm like going, I just spent $900 on a coffee maker from an Instagram. And you think about what's being fed into us, and we got to get control of those impulses from a spending standpoint. If we're in a hole, and we got to stop it. One of the things that I do when there's people that are really struggling with using credit cards, I literally say, we're going to go get a coffee can and take that coffee can, we fill it with water. We're going to take all the credit cards, we're going to put them in there. We're going to freeze it. You want to make a purchase, take that coffee can out of the freezer, you set it down. Can't put it in the microwave, don't put it in the oven, you'll melt the cards. Microwave, it can't go in there because it's metal. So let it thaw out. In the next 36 hours, it'll thaw out. If you still want to make the purchase, go ahead and dry that card off and go ahead and do it. If not, then we don't have to worry about it.
Delayed gratification on that. Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of decisions we all make that if somebody prevented us from making that decision at that moment, we probably wouldn't make that decision later on. Because with time, I think we get more wisdom. So,
yeah.
Okay, I want to shift gears for a second.
Yeah.
You're the money man. You got this money machine. You got this podcast. called Affluent Entrepreneur. You've got all these workshops and programs and coaching and all these things you do. Why don't you share for the audience who you are and why you are the way you are? And
Gosh, for me,
and who influenced you?
Yeah, I mean, you knew where I was going right from the get-go. I think I'm a son of an immigrant. I'm a son of a dad who he was growing up in a country where they were persecuting. They were hunting them down, and he was one of 5 people that were smuggling people out of the country and smuggling guns in to protect them. And he was 17 years old. And at 17 years old, they captured 2 of them. My dad wasn't one of them, but they were hunting the other 3. They were going to hang all 5 of them in the square as an example. And so my dad took his granddad's name. Our family name isn't Abraham. That was my grandfather's name that we took as a name. He got fake papers. The other 3 got fake papers. They helped the other 2 escape, and the 5 of them went across the deserts, and my dad came here at 17 years old. He came here to go to school, and 4 days before he passed away, I sat with him, and he told me, I said, "Tell me the story about you guys leaving Baghdad." And he says, he called them. He says we were called the 5 Mavericks, and I said, "I know at 17 years old that the last thing I was thinking about doing is smuggling guns in, smuggling people out, or the thought that I might be hung in the square." I said, I was 17. I was in college, my first year. I was thinking about who am I going to date. I go, what made you be willing to do this and know that your life was on the line? And he was sitting in this wheelchair in this rehab center, and he sat up tall and bright, and he looked me in the eye and says, "Because it was the right thing to do." And I think that my dad made a decision, and that decision was an inflection point, not just for him, but for families that he saved. And what I didn't realize growing up is how much this quiet, he was a small guy, he was 5'5", but how much the silent, quiet, small guy impacted me. But that was always in the back of my head, the way he showed up. Always the right thing to do. And the realization that had he not made the choice that he made at 17, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation. I wouldn't have grandchildren. I wouldn't be able to have an impact. I wouldn't be able to do the things that I've been gifted and blessed to do. And so I feel like for me, to honor him, I need to show up every day. I need to be the best father, the best grandfather, brother, son, mentor, friend that I possibly be. Now, I'm not infallible. I make a whole lot of mistakes. But I know my spirit inside is to come from a place of what's the right thing to do? How do I serve? How do I help? How do I make a difference? And not for the want of something in return, but for the hope to see someone step up. I think that legacy, we talk about legacy often, and I talk about getting the legacy factor, but we talk about legacy as something we leave behind. And I think it's a mistake, because it's really easy to talk about, I'm going to plan for when I'm not here, so I leave something behind. But how about when we are here? How about instead of leaving a legacy, that we're living a legacy, to realize that each moment that we give to life actually matters, and that it's not some complicated thing. It's not some statue somewhere in memory of you. It's, and I'm proud of you. You did a good job. You'll get it next time. It's the little things that can shift someone and keep them going forward. That when we stack those moments up and we just keep stacking them, we know that everyone is better for it. And I think that that's really what drives me to serve, what drives me to do the pocket. A dear friend of mine, David Bach, when I told him I was going to write this additional book that I have coming out, and he said, "Why are you doing this? You don't have to work. You had the cancer. Just cruise." I said, I can't. This is what I feel called to do, to serve. Because if there's one person that I can do something for that gets them out of the hole or that points them in the right direction, then that's enough. And I think that's really what drives everything I do.
That's awesome. So your keynote, share with everyone the title of your keynote and the message of your keynote, because of your story that you just shared is a part of your keynote.
Yeah, it is. The keynote's called Get the Legacy Factor. And it's how do we close the gap of how good we are today and how good we're capable of being. It's how do we not settle in life? Let me be clear. It's not about not having contentment and satisfaction, but it's about knowing that, hey, if I was put here with a set of gifts, with a message, with something inside of me that needed to come out, then I don't want to disrespect that. And how do we bring the best out of people and best out of ourselves to show up, whether it's as a parent, whether it's a sibling or a boss, an entrepreneur, to sit back and say, is there something more I can do? Because it's easy for us, especially in today's society, I think, for us to quit. I had a martial arts studio for 11 years, and the black belts, when they would test for black belt, it was a 4.5-hour test. And they would go through, they would do their techniques, they would do their forms, they would do all that. Then they would spar all of the other people taking the test, and they would spar all the black belts. And the last 3 minutes was they had to spar me. That was the last part of the test. 180 seconds, and they're dead. They're dying. They're exhausted. There was parents that thought I was absolutely abusive by pushing them through this. And when we got done, they looked at me and I said, "That's a long test." And they say, "Yeah, 4.5 hours." And they said, "No." I said, "It was 180 seconds. It took me 4.5 hours to prepare you for it. That someday in life, you're going to run up against the wall where your body, your mind, everything says, I got no more, just like you did today. But you found it for 180 seconds. This might be the first reference point that there's more inside of you than you actually believe. Find it again when it happens in life." Now all the parents said, "Well, I get it now." But we don't push people. And I think people have a lot more in them than meets the eye and that they even know.
I 1000% agree with you. The, cold plunging will show you have more in you than you thought you did. Sports, doesn't matter what kind of sport it is, it tests you. And it really is that inflection point where you think you're done, you think you can't give any more, but you're not finished. And when you break through, you break through thresholds when you do that.
Yeah.
And it opens up your mind to the idea that you can do more, you can be more, you can accomplish more, you can impact more.
Yeah.
So you shared with me offline a while back about your relationship with your son.
Yeah.
And that we talked about the idea that obviously your son would not be here, but for the decisions that your father made. What have you done, like in the last handful of years? Because there's obviously things you did as a father when your son was living under your roof. But now that he's a married man and has his own kids, how do you mentor your son when sometimes he doesn't want to be mentored, but you have more, you've lived life twice as long, so you have more wisdom than he does in some areas, maybe not every area.
Yeah.
How do you interact with your son now so that you can be an asset to him, show up for him, but not annoy him?
This is a great question. So, yeah, and I raised him for many years as a single dad. So we have a very close relationship. But I think, and I do the same thing with my siblings. I will make suggestions, but I can no longer tell him this is what you do. Because he'll say, I don't care what you say, Dad. So I'll coach him from the perspective of, if it were me, or if I have a story of when I went through something, I said, let me tell you how I screwed this thing up. I said, and I want him to do what he wants to do, and hopes that he finds that his values and his morals will be enough with some of the guidance to make the right choices. And to date, knock on wood, it has been. I mean, I'm looking at him as a husband and as a father, and how he is. He's from the outside looking in, he's a much better parent than I ever was, and that warms my heart tremendously as a dad. But so I don't typically, unless he directly asks me for advice and says, "Dad, I don't know how to handle this," then I'll be more directive. If I see him doing something that I think, hey, maybe you ought not to be doing this, I said, I'll usually say, hey, this is unsolicited, but I'm going to tell you what I did and how I got myself in trouble, or you might want to think about this. I said, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I just want you to consider it. And then I just let him take it from there. Knock on wood, he's made the right choices, and knock on wood, I don't have to have those conversations with him very often. He seems to have a good head on his shoulders and very well connected.
Okay, I'm going to circle back, Mel. We were talking about your concept of the gap between what you're doing and what you could be doing, how good or great you are, but how greater you could be. What do you find is the most common gap filler for most guys? That is the difference between where they could be and where they are today. What's the why? What's the reason why they're in the position they're in and they're not in the position where the gap's closed?
I think it's belief. It's belief in themselves. It's seeing things through the world of possibility, and the realization that even if they don't get to the absolute destination they were searching for, that getting partway there is better than nothing at all. And they're willing to embrace that. The other thing that I think happens for those that seem to really have it is they're celebrating the journey along the way and noticing the progress and not aspiring for the perfection. Because when we aspire to the perfection, they think the celebration is only when they get to the destination. When they don't get to the destination, it's I failed. No, every day is growth. Every day is progress. And I think that that's what I see with most, is that they don't settle for where they are today because they think there's more to try and they're willing to try. And two, they are always curious to try and see if there's a better way. We did it. Is there a better way? And I think those are probably the biggest things. I think the things that hold them back and keep that gap there is, and I'm going to throw a third one, is that they don't have the belief in themselves. And then they allow what others think to dictate what they can and can't do. The surgeons, when they saw me just in February, they said, I'm 3 years clear from the cancer. We did the scope, and when he was done, he looked at me and he says, I'm absolutely delighted. I said, good. Let's keep it that way. But he said, when you came in with a 7.5 centimeter tumor, it's not where I thought you would be. He says, you're better than I ever imagined could have happened. And he said, most of my patients don't approach it the way you approached it. And most of them, when they get to this point, will go backwards to the old habits that may have got them in trouble. Now, we don't know why I got the cancer. I'm not a smoker, not a drinker. So it was something, but we don't know why. But he says people go back to smoking, they'll go back to drinking. And I said, I can't, because I love life too much and I know I have so much to give. I can't do that. So I'm forward. You tell me where to go. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. And I know that I'll fight it differently than anyone else. And I don't care. And I think that if we took that to our life, whether it's athletics, I mean, it's a famous story. Michael Jordan not making the high school, getting cut from the high school basketball team. Okay. But if he allowed that to dictate what he was possible for him, we got to ignore there's plenty of critics out in the world, especially with social media. We got to ignore that. And we got to keep going. And we get to define it. We get to design it, and we get to run the miles. And we are the only ones that say, I quit.
Well, something that I found interesting in sports, and it applies to everything, is the idea that you create your own destiny. And people have a tendency to believe that it's luck, it's opportunity, it's circumstances, it's the curveballs they get thrown in their 20s or 30s that are the reason why they're in the situation they're in today, because they absorb that failure, and instead of shedding themselves of those situations, they buy into the story that the world writes for them instead of writing their own story. And I had this situation with my older son when he left high school. He was all world and a lot of different things, but I knew that he was a 99.9er in terms of belief. He wasn't 100%er, and I just knew it. But it never hurt him because he was plenty good enough to do well. But I shared with him when I dropped him off in college that, hey man, you got to get to 100. It's a choice. It's you loving you. It's you believing in you. Because if you don't, your teammates won't believe in you. Your coaches won't believe in you. So what happens is when people know you and you're in a comfortable environment, you don't have to be 100%er and you can still be successful. You can join a family business and still be successful. But when let's say you parachute out of a plane and you land in another country or a different industry, if you don't believe, you'll die because people will crumble you. Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges we don't talk about it a lot, but one of the biggest challenges, especially for young men, is believing that they're worthy. Because they've been rejected, they've had failures, they've made bad decisions, or teacher told them this, or coach told them that.
Yeah.
Pretty soon, by the time they're 25, they're like, I guess that's just what it is. I'm too slow, too short, too fat, too dumb, too something. Your thoughts on that?
I think it's absolutely true. I think that we need to be really careful about what we say to people. Especially when we're parenting or we're working with kids. When I had the martial arts studio and seeing some of I had a mom come in and say, she was frustrated. And I said, what's up? And she said, oh, Max, he's just not a good speller. And I said, I said, when did you give him that title? And she goes, what are you talking about? Kind of that same reaction you got. And I said, as soon as you gave him the title, you gave him the way out. Mm-hmm. I said, what if he is a good speller, but they're not teaching him the way he needs to learn? Is that his fault or theirs? And I said, so I brought him in and I gave him 2 words to spell. And he couldn't spell them. So I wrote them out and I said, I just want you to take a picture of it in your mind. I said, now close your eyes. I said, you see the picture? He said, yeah. I said, write what you see in the picture down. You spelled the words. I said, they're teaching him wrong. But had we allowed that to set in, he would have grown up saying, I'm not a good speller. And that identity would have become an identity. But the worst part is I think that those limiting identities will start to expand in other areas of our life. I'm not worthy. I'm not. And we wonder why people will have to do other things to cope. And I think we just got, words matter. And I don't sugarcoat my words. So I'll be direct and and everything. You don't sugarcoat your words either, but at the same time, the intent behind the words and the desire to move people to grow, I think is really important. But it's often we just don't even think about how those things will impact down the road. I remember listening to a talk radio show when I don't even remember. I was a kid. I was riding in the car with my dad and he was listening. All I remember was them saying there was a psychologist on talking about creativity. And all he said is, it's a mistake. Now, and maybe this was me holding on to it so I could tell my mom I didn't need to clean my room. Because they said it's a mistake to go right behind a child and clean up after them immediately after they do something. He says, let them do what they're going to do, then teach them to clean up afterwards, because that's their creativity. And if we keep, one thing at a time, and you clean up after them, what you're doing is you're stalling their creativity. And it just stuck with me. I don't even know who the doctor or the psychologist was. I don't even know what talk radio it was, but I still remember it going, things that we don't realize we do can impact how we respond later in life without us even knowing. And so I think that some of us, first things first, whether it's financial or athletic, intellectual, I think there are some physical limitations, especially when it comes to athletics. I'm never dunking a ball unless it's on an elementary school lot, okay? Not at 62, I'm not going to get up there. But by the same token, the majority of stuff is learnable if we put the dedication in. And so if we look at it from that perspective and we say, I am the only one that can put limiters in my life, then I have the ability to say, I'll decide where that line is. But too often we're allowing others, coaches, teachers, parents, siblings, friends, peers, people we don't even know on social media, cyber, all that stuff. And they are setting the limiters for us. And no matter how strong things are, how difficult things are, why not? Why not stay in the game and define the game your way?
Here's an interesting perspective, dovetailing on what you just said about positive and negative feedback. We have a negative bias in our minds because when we hear something negative, we remember it forever. When somebody gives us a compliment, we remember it for a few days. And then next week we need another compliment. So as a coach, coaches have so much power, so much influence, especially the younger the student is. And it doesn't matter if it's what sport it is. It doesn't matter if it's boy sports or girl sports. When a coach is frustrated because, let's say it's a man, he's frustrated because they didn't win. And in his post-game speech, he flies off the handle. He has no idea how he's going to harm those kids for a long time. And it's not that they're going to need to go to therapy and they're going to be all this kind of stuff. It's just in big moments under pressure. Could be when they're a business person down the road, or they're trying to get into law school or get into some MBA program or whatever it might be. It just comes back like, well, I guess I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
Right? And so what I've seen in my own life with my own kids is they remember all my negative reactions, all my short tempers, all my frustrations. They don't remember the hugs and the love yous and all that stuff because it has a short shelf life. But the negative ones, I mean, they've got those memorialized in my house, right?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, it's so true.
Well, looking at the time, I want to thank you for being on. But before I let you go, I want to ask if there's anything that you would like to share that we didn't talk about, I didn't ask you about. You might have been wanting to share something, and I didn't ask you a good follow-up question because I might have missed the point. Is there anything you would like to share with the audience?
I think the only thing is for us to really look at our own lives and say that you're put here for some reason. I don't know what that reason is, but each of us have an individual reason. Even if you're guessing at the reason, live into it. Do what you can every single day. You've been given only a certain number of slices of life. And every day you're going to hand a slice away. You'll never get back. Make sure that you're giving a slice away and you're giving that slice 100% of everything that you have within you. And don't allow someone to give you less back in return. And when you do, I think that in the end, you'll find a life that outlives you.
Well said. Mel, if there's somebody out there that was listening and they're like, man, I need to get with this guy and learn some more about his financial programs, his coaching and things of that nature, where can they find you in the social media and web world?
So my website, melabraham.com. The show is the Affluent Entrepreneur Show.com. And then on Instagram at Mel Abraham with the number 9, Mel Abraham 9. And I'd love to hear from people, and I love having conversations and seeing if I can help in any way.
I want to thank you for tuning in to Pro Mindset Podcast. If you enjoyed the listen, please leave a 5-star rating. If the message was a vibration you connected with, and you have any friends, family, or colleagues who would benefit, then please share this episode with them. You can follow Pro Mindset Podcast on the following social media platforms: Instagram and YouTube, Pro Mindset Podcast; Twitter and Facebook, Pro Mindset Pod; LinkedIn, Pro Mindset. We will drop our shows, Pro Mindset Podcasts, every Wednesday morning, and we invite you to listen and subscribe. Also, don't hesitate to check out our archives to listen to previous shows. And finally, I encourage you to embrace a Pro Mindset truth from today's show. It just might be the key to unlock the pro inside you.